Welcome to episode number 238 of Truth Telling with Elizabeth D'Alto. I am your host, Elizabeth D'Alto, and this is Sunday Sermon number 28. If you're new to the podcast, or this is your first Sunday sermon, these are shorter solo episodes, just 10 to 20 minutes usually, that go a bit deeper and can be a little more esoteric than our regular interviews. During Sunday sermons, I do things like oracle readings or share my favorite prayers, poems, and excerpts from what I'm reading or studying right now. These are like wild and untamed gospel, heart ponderings, and delicious morsels of wisdom filled with creative and inspiring ideas, thoughts, and ruminations to spark the truth, power, wisdom, and love that lives within you. All belief systems are welcome here on the show. My truth, ponderings, experiences, and curiosities are simply that, my own. So no matter what your faith is, may you get exactly what you need from listening to this, and may you remember always that everything you've ever needed has always been inside of you. You were made from love, you are love, and you are loved. Today's Sunday sermon is inspired by one of my favorite poets, Niceness. If you want to look her up, it's Nayyirahwahid. And we'll put a link to all of her stuff in the show notes, which can be found at untameyourself.com/T as in truth, T as in telling -238 for this Sunday sermon. Particularly this poem that I saved from her Instagram feed earlier this week. I love listening. It is one of the only spaces where you could be still and moved at the same time. I'm going to read it again. I love listening. It's one of the only spaces where you could be still and moved at the same time. First, this poem makes me think about all the times when someone says something and I'm just like, oh, that was so good. Or when someone says something and you wish you had thought of it yourself, or someone says something and it just gives you life, like something happens inside of you and you just are so glad they said what they said, because you know that even if it was just one small thing, you can't unhear it. Your life will literally never be the same. And so I'm just riffing on listening today in this episode, listening to yourself, listening to life, and how listening relates to trust, and trust relates to surrender. Because we don't know what to trust if we're not listening, and we don't know what to surrender if we're not listening. And listening is a function of paying attention. Paying attention and listening both require that we slow down, that we pause here and there, that we cultivate the ability to create space between our thoughts. Things like movement, being outside, meditation, and journaling really help me with this because they help me to observe my thoughts in different ways. Do you ever notice this if you're on a walk on the beach or on a walk in nature, how your thoughts, if you give them the chance, can actually slow down? If you turn your attention from the inner landscape of your own mind to the outer landscape of the environment around you, the thoughts just naturally slow down because you shifted your attention. So if you're someone with a really active mind, which I am, I have to make effort to slow down my mind and to create space between my thoughts. So this is why journaling is helpful as well, because it gives me a place to observe my thoughts, to contemplate in a way that I could see it on paper. And whether that's typing into a Google Doc as your journal and then being able to read back your thought process, or writing things out in a journal and again, being able to read back on your thought process when you take it from just something that's happening inside your mind to something that you could see tangibly. It's just a different way of observing your thoughts, of becoming familiar with your thought process so that you can discern how to engage with it, how to interact with it, but as well become a real expert on how it functions, on how your thought process works and on how it functions. You might be someone who has to really contemplate and ruminate on things internally before you can bring them out into the world. You might be someone who needs to actually process your thoughts out loud. If you're an external processor like that, which I am when it comes to certain things, creative products or projects for sure. I need to talk things out because, again, we bring this to the senses. When we're journaling, we can read and we can see our thoughts. When we express them out loud, we can hear them because there's a difference between the hearing that happens in your mind and the hearing that happens when you're actually saying something, when it's coming out of your mouth and when you can hear it rather than when you're just thinking about it. Of course, you're kind of hearing it in your inner ear when you're thinking, but when you're talking it out, you're hearing it expressed. You can hear it differently out loud than you hear it when it's only happening inside your mind. I hope this is making sense to you. And if it's not, it's fine. It doesn't need to. I'm really a big believer that if something needs to make sense, it absolutely will. So let's come back to trust and surrender for a moment and these different aspects, these different ways. So we hear our thoughts, they run through our mind and we hear it internally. We can put our thoughts on paper. We can read them and see them and take it in that way. We can speak things out loud so we can actually hear it. And from there, we can become clear. From there, we can go, oh, that's the thing that makes the most sense, or that's the truest statement. There's a lot of talk about transparency and about authenticity in our modern world. And sometimes we need to process through things before we can share the thing that is the highest and the truest and the most accurate for us. So, how are you processing through these things? How do you get to trust? Sometimes you need to work through things a little bit before you say a thing because you might change your mind. If you are needing to surrender because you are attached to something or because something has its grip on you and it's stressing you out, or you're feeling fearful or you're worrying, to process out the thing that you are fearful or worried or conflicted or stuck around is helpful. Again, whether it's you need to take it to a meditation and observe it, write it out in a journal, speak it out to someone that you could trust or a professional, all of these things help us to get a better experience, a fuller experience of what is actually true for us so that we could decide what we trust, what we want to move forward on. We can make better choices and decisions. Or maybe we need to surrender around something, release our grip on it, release our need or desire to control, or release our attachment and create some space in our lives and in our worlds for things to just unfold a little bit before we take action. We can be a partner with life in allowing things to happen rather than just completely controlling things. This is why one of our most popular mantras in Wild Soul Movement is less control, more magic. Speaking of mantras, mantras also help me in listening and in relating to my thoughts because through a mantra practice, you choose your thoughts. You pick one powerful thought form and you repeat it to yourself. And what that does is it begins to program your conscious mind and reinforce the awareness and habit of choosing your thoughts rather than being controlled by them. So back to listening, listening and hearing are also not the same thing because listening gives you data, but hearing is how you interpret and what you infer from the data. When you speak with a coach, often they'll say something like, "What I'm hearing you say is," which is great because often when we listen, we don't hear. So when we take a moment to reflect what we do hear, we can get confirmation. We can hedge for accuracy. This saves us from making assumptions all the time or just misinterpreting what others are saying. Do you realize how often we misinterpret each other? Especially in the digital age when we're predominantly reading communication and not actually hearing it. Because when we hear what we read as well, right? Like in our minds, in our inner ear, we're putting tone and we're putting voice inflection onto things that may or may not be correct. And this is one of the things that I really love about having a podcast. People will say to me all the time, even if they're reading something I've written, I can hear you saying it. And you all can hear me saying things that you read me writing because you know my voice, because you know my inflection, because you've gotten to know me through listening to episodes on the show. Maybe not if this is your first or your first couple, but you will as you continue to keep listening. You know where I stand. You know that I am always coming from a place of compassion and kindness and love and service, even if what I'm saying is direct. Having boundaries is something I'm really good at, and I know that's triggering for people who don't. And so when I set a boundary, or when I'm firm, or when I'm direct, or when I make a request, or when someone responds to me in a way that wasn't what I was setting the intention or the container and the space for, and I address it, people will be triggered by that, but I'm okay with that because I'm still coming from a place of love and compassion and service and kindness. Something that was an amazing distinction that I came across last year was the distinction between being nice and being kind. Kindness is your energy. It's where you're coming from. And kindness can also be fierce. Niceness can really be fake. When we think of these phrases that we hear people say sometimes, like, oh, bless her heart. Niceness can be passive aggressive. Niceness can be tone policing. So if you want to know more about, Google that. The difference between kind and nice. There's probably a lot of interpretations out there, but I have learned a lot. Something I realized is I am not a nice person, but I am a kind person. Let that sink in. Especially for women. If you're a woman listening to this, we are really, many of us, taught that we are supposed to be nice, that we need to be nice, which often leads to not being genuine. Because when we do the nice thing, it's not always the right thing. And there's a rightness, there's a correctness to kindness that is not inherent in niceness. So I hope all of this is making sense. In a way, this is kind of revolutionary, this careful way of listening and hearing, because we are really taught, and our culture is kind of predicated on lazy listening and inadequate hearing, of checking in with others rather than assuming that we're right or correct, being willing to be wrong or be corrected and not take it personally or make it mean anything about us. This was actually really awesome. On the day I'm recording this just happened last night, actually. A couple weeks ago, February 5th, if you want to look back on my Instagram, I made a post about Trayvon Martin. And if you don't know who Trayvon Martin is, look him up. If you don't know who Trayvon Martin is, that was actually the basis of my post. And someone sent me a message yesterday that said, Elizabeth, on February 5th, you posted about Trayvon Martin and selective consciousness. For a long time, I've had resentment in my heart because when I tried to interact with people about racial equality, my words were not taken as I intended and I was attacked. Your post earlier this month broke me open and lit a warm, smoldering fire in me. I understand now through your example that part of trying to understand difficult issues like this is falling on your face, and that's okay. Thank you so much. And what I love about this is how we learn. So I want to come back to that thing I just said and reread it to you. Being willing to be wrong or be corrected and not take it personally or make it mean anything about us, but rather being grateful for the clarification, being grateful for the learning, being grateful that now you know better and you can do better the next time. And listen, sometimes these misinterpretations are even funny. I can think of so many times that I'm like, oh, damn, I was way off. I'm so glad I asked. I would rather know that I was wrong than be operating under an incorrect assumption, assessment, or interpretation. Because you know what happens when you're way off and you don't ask. Conflict happens, misunderstanding happens, and that's how harm takes place. That's how we're harmful in our communication and in our impact, even no matter what our intent was. So those were my riffings and musings today on listening and hearing, on trust, surrender, on speaking up, on letting go of your need to be right, on being willing to be wrong. Again, this was episode number 238. You can find show notes at untameyourself.com/TT-238. This was Sunday sermon number 28. I hope you really enjoyed it. If you did, and you listened to the show on iTunes, please leave us a review. That's really helpful. As well, share this with anyone that you think would really benefit from it. You could share it on social media. You can reshare our posts. I've been seeing so many of you lately take screenshots and sharing in your Insta stories, which is awesome. Thank you so much. I love seeing those tags. So I appreciate you all. I hope you have an amazing, beautiful, nourishing week. And if you have any challenges going on, I am blasting you with tons of love and all the Care Bear stares that things will soon be easier for you. Have an awesome, awesome week.